The end is near for these Dynasty running backs. Welcome back, fellas. Every year I talk about this subject. It's the running back age and touch apex time. Which running backs may succumb to father time every year? These guys could be players to avoid in redraft, players to avoid in Dynasty, or players to sell in Dynasty. This year's very unique because I think as this information becomes more and more popular and more common around the fantasy space, the market gets sharper and sharper, and age is being baked into prices more so than it ever has been. This year, more than ever, it is really important to know your league and how your league behaves and know how to value these guys appropriately based on that assessment that you've made so far. So it's going to be a ton of fun to break this down. Like, comment, subscribe if you get some value from this video. Now let's get into it. All right, so as I say every year, however long you think former stud running backs have left in the tank is usually less than you think. If you think that Christian McCaffrey has 3 more years left in the tank, there's a good chance that there's less time than that. If you think that Derrick Henry has 2 or 3 more years left in the tank, there's a good chance that it's less time than that. The average running back around the NFL lasts just 2.67 years. So we're talking about a position with an extremely short shelf life. This is a position where the top 20 running backs in ADP every fantasy football season since 2015 have a 1 in 5 chance of missing 6 or more games. They have a 60% chance or near a 60% chance of disappointing you in some regard, whether they get injured, whether they bust and lose ADP, or they are just fine and they lose a couple spots of ADP so they didn't kill you. But regardless, 60% of the time, those 3 scenarios are likely to happen with the top 20 running backs and ADPs. So with running backs, we want to be picky with them. We want to, in all formats, bet on the guys that project the best. Redraft, Dynasty, and Best Ball, which is why we suggest picking your studs early or picking a stud early, going with a hero or double hero or running back kind of build, and then potentially fading the running back position and, backfilling with late options at that position for upside swings. Now, of course, price factors in. This year on Underdog, it's becoming increasingly easier to bet on running back profiles that you would normally not bet on. For example, the Zamir White, Najee Harris's of the world in redraft this year. Maybe in some of your home leagues, they'll go rounds 3, 4, and 5 like they used to go 5 years ago. But for the most part, the market is letting these guys slide to the 7th, 8th, 9th round in Underdog drafts. And at that point, you're actually okay betting on that type of profile or holding those guys in Dynasty, whereas before, those guys would be valued way higher than they should be in all formats, and they would be easy fades, and this would be easy advice. And of course, none bigger example than on Underdog Fantasy, where everybody is completely wised up to wide receivers should go early and often, running backs, unless they're an elite profile, probably should go later. So even though the strategy isn't quite as much of an edge as it used to be in sharper leagues, it can still help you a ton. So a few years ago, the study that I'm referring to, I conducted on formerly elite running backs, so guys that had finished as an RB1 in fantasy multiple times. So we're talking about everybody should know these names, Todd Gurley's and, Clinton Portis, like all these guys since 2000. I basically documented when they fell off, and I updated every single year and bring you guys this video. So the criteria for this study is multi-time running backs. So again, elite fantasy running backs who have finished as an RB1 in points per game more than once since the year 2000, who have dropped off, because they all do. Father Time is undefeated, especially at this position. Their fall off, quote unquote, was defined as their biggest PPR point per game decline after their age 25 season, in which cases they were not an RB1 anymore. So after they were 25, 26, 27, 28 years old, their biggest point per game drop off from one year to the next would be their decline that I'm kind of documenting here. And in most cases, we see evidence of this in their efficiency as well as with raw fantasy production. So to give you guys an example of how this plays out, Austin Eckler this past year was the RB1 in 2022, right? He had a 21.9 point per game season, was absolutely outstanding. But this year, we saw him get injured. We saw him be inefficient. We saw his fantasy production take a big-time downturn to 13.2 PPR points per game from 21.9. He was the RB1 overall in 2022, the RB21 overall in 2023. Hence, he is in this sample now. He has fallen off and is now a part of the 50 running backs that have fallen off since 2000. And there's so many guys on the screen right now. I'm not going to go over individual cases or anything. And I've talked about this in years past already. So I wanted to remove the Hall of Famers and the future Hall of Famers as historical outliers, because guys like LaDainian Tomlinson and Adrian Peterson and Frank Gore, guys who are enshrined in Canton or are going to be enshrined in Canton, just played an absurdly long time for the running back position because that's simply not common. And aside from Christian McCaffrey and aside from Derrick Henry, there are no real future Hall of Fame running backs currently in the NFL. And it's not like the current NFL landscape is suddenly going to get any easier to become a Hall of Famer at this position, because longevity and dominance over a long period of time is just not something that we see as often anymore. And even a guy like Derrick Henry, he's now in this sample as somebody who experienced his fall off in 2023 because he dropped off 4.4 PPR points per game from his 2022 production as a top 5 running back to just outside of the RB1 territory this year with a 4.4 per game drop off, like I said. So now we were going to refine this sample down to 37 running backs since 2000 who are not likely to make the Hall of Fame. And you guys can see a number of running backs that you probably recognize: Leonard Fournette, Kareem Hunt, Dalvin Cook, Alvin Kamara, Austin Eckler, Aaron Jones, Josh Jacobs, DeMarco Murray, guys that we've all probably used in fantasy leagues the past couple of years. The average point per game fall off of these guys when they fell off was 5.8 PPR points per game. And that's just the tip of the iceberg, because that was their raw fantasy point per game fall off, but a lot of other things happened as well. And a lot of this stuff was predictive. So if we look at their age entering that point per game fall off season, so prior to their actual fall off, a lot of them were around the age of, 27, 28. The average ended up being 27.8 years old. And career touch-wise, a lot of these guys were above 1,000 career touches, and the average ended up being 1,355 touches. So that gives us a nice little trend line, a nice little benchmark to be able to take into future fantasy drafts, because if we have a bunch of guys who are over 1,500, over 2,000 career touches, we probably should be aware that they're not likely what they used to be, because that is a lot of carries, a lot of damage to these guys' bodies. And if they're 26, 27, 28 years old, which a lot of these guys are, it's very difficult to maintain that level of explosiveness, maintain that level of dominance when you've taken a beating like that. And as I discussed last year, I also wanted to kind of factor in where their redraft ADP changed, because even though this is kind of a dynasty-centric video, we have sites like Underdog Fantasy with tons of paid data, guys who are doing drafts all the time where we can analyze prices of players, and they're usually quite efficient. We've gotten really good at efficiently pricing these players, more so than other platforms, because there's not as much noise. These are actually paid drafts. And when you look at the guys that lost ADP in redraft the following season after their fall off, we can kind of deduce that the market realized they fell off. They saw some kind of inefficiency. The lack of play to their former self was visible to a lot of the general public. And Alvin Kamara in 2023 does join a list of Mark Ingram in 2019, DeMarco Murray in 2017, and David Johnson in 2019 as the only non-Hall of Famers to actually outperform their redraft ADP after their drop-off season. And of course, if you guys recall, last year Kamara was suspended, which contributed to some of the reason why his redraft ADP was lower. So unfortunately, I was wrong about Kamara from this perspective last year, but I was trusting the data, because 26 of the 30 running backs we have a redraft ADP for, or 86.67%, failed to outperform their ADP the following season. So once we've seen these guys already kind of fall off, the good, general blanket statement piece of advice is that in redraft, you probably want to avoid these guys, and in Dynasty, you probably want to sell them. Dynasty ADP is pretty self-explanatory, but in case you guys are new to Dynasty or you don't know this yet, your running backs who are above the age of 25, 26 years old are never going to gain value again. You're probably only as good as your production at that point. So guys like Saquon Barkley, Christian McCaffrey, and Josh Jacobs, who are currently still RB1s in Dynasty, project pretty well, even though they're above, the age of 25, 26 years old. Whereas guys like Austin Eckler and Dalvin Cook of years past, the second they're not producing, they're virtually useless in Dynasty. It's impossible to trade them. Nobody wants them on their team. Guys that you might not even view as that old too, like a Jonathan Taylor who has a decent amount of touches under his belt. It's coming very quickly for guys like this as well. So if you have running back production on your team, you better be competing in Dynasty, because otherwise you are best to ship that guy off of your team, get future draft capital for him, get young players who can appreciate and value for them, because that is going to further your rebuild even more. And if you are rebuilding and wondering, okay, well, how the hell am I going to get running backs now? There's a number of different ways. A, you buy at the top of the board guys like Breece Hall, Bijan Robinson, Jahmyr Gibbs, who are extremely valuable and have a lot of years left in the tank, or you draft them in the rookie draft and you hit on them that way. Or if they are really cheap in your league, like they are in most of the leagues that I play in, you can buy Joe Mixon types on the low because these guys have already depreciated in value and they're probably not going to get any cheaper than they currently are because they do project pretty decently. But again, if that's not your league market, if your league market still views running back production as very important and we got to spend up for it, then you are more likely to go with a more zero RB kind of feel to your dynasty rosters. And as I've done in recent years as well, I wanted to remove any of the running backs from this sample that were pre-2010s because the ADP was not sharp back then. In 2005, people just had no idea what they were doing for fantasy football purposes. And those running backs were built a little bit differently. We had, Jamal Lewis and Clinton Portis types who are built a lot more sturdy, built a lot more firm. And those guys seem to last a little bit longer than the current day running backs that we have now because they're a little bit smaller. They don't quite have the same level of size to them, ability to carry a workload. So this data set that we have here of running backs best kind of represents the current landscape of running backs in 2024 fantasy drafts of today's game. You guys can see there that the average number of career touches in this sample size since 2010, guys who have fallen off, 1,152 career touches, and the age entering their drop-off season was about 27.3 years old. So again, if a player is 1,200 touches and 27 years of age, they're kind of over both thresholds of the age and touch apex for the running back position. And also, too, when you analyze these players, their redraft ADP fell off 17 spots the following year after their drop-off. And if you were lucky, you probably got a flex play out of them. You probably got an RB3 out of them. But a lot of these guys were not drafted in that range. They were drafted as RB2s because we're like, oh, they're a little bit older, so we'll just draft them in the dead zone and see because they project well in terms of a volume standpoint and they've done it before, we feel comfortable clicking the button on them. We'll just draft these guys anyway. And a lot of the times they would disappoint you mightily. Think of Le'Veon Bell types or Leonard Fournette types of years past where you thought you were getting a safe, solidified RB who had carried a big workload for a long time, but Father Time just caught up with these guys, and they were no longer the players they once were. On average, these Dynasty running backs also went from Dynasty RB 11 to RB 28 on average. So we're talking about guys that also lost a ton of Dynasty running back ADP as well. And with older running backs in Redraft and Dynasty, you're only as good as the year-to-year projection. If you don't have a good year-to-year projection on one given season, we should not care what you've done to that point in your career. For example, we look at a guy like Aaron Jones, who's switching teams, who has a little bit of backfield competition. It doesn't really matter to me that he's been productive with Green Bay. He's on an offense now with a young quarterback going through a transition. He's the type of guy that I'm kind of avoiding right now because a lot of people will just look at Aaron Jones, know he's been a great fantasy running back, and push him up the board because of name value, and that's not what I'm doing. We got to wipe the slate clean and just think about how they project this year. Take away all of the other noise factors that, oh, this guy helped me win a championship in 2019, so I feel good about him. No, this is a 29-and-a-half-year-old running back who's on a new team with a young quarterback going through a transition. Maybe he's not quite the bet that you want him to be where he's going. So let's take this study into the older running backs now. Last year, we saw a lot of aging running backs bite the dust. Dalvin Cook, Leonard Fournette don't even have jobs right now. So that's how quickly it can happen to these guys. Jamal Williams basically likely dusted as well. Probably not going to be fantasy relevant ever again for the rest of their careers. The touch leaders among active fantasy running backs right now, you can see Ezekiel Elliott standing strong over the 2,000 touch mark. Derrick Henry now over the 2,000 touch mark as well. As I mentioned, the biggest W of this process was fading Austin Eckler last year because he was a top 12 dynasty running back just a year ago, and also a first-round redraft pick. So if you weren't taking him because of this study, then I helped you out because you probably took CeeDee Lamb instead. You probably took Amon-Ra St. Brown instead. Guys that were going around Austin Eckler were much better picks at wide receiver, and that's kind of the entire thesis of this argument. If these guys are going super high and they're old and they're above the age and touch apex, you probably want to fade them. Aaron Jones, who I already made reference to, saw his season get derailed by injuries as he is now well over the marks, age and touch apex-wise. Derrick Henry, again, if you choose to fade Derrick Henry, that's up to you because even though he's a future Hall of Famer, in my opinion, he did show signs of decline last year, but that might be offset now by the fact that he's going from Tennessee, who was a bad team with a rookie quarterback, to Baltimore, who has Lamar Jackson and is going to be a top offense. Finally, Josh Jacobs also factors into this range as well, and you guys might not be aware that Josh Jacobs has this many touches under his belt, and he's over 26 years old now, but he had his fall-off season, technically. If you look at the criteria I outlined at first, if you're after age 25 and you have a big time point per game drop off like he did from 2022, where he was up like 19 points per game, and then last year he was at like 13 points per game, he finished outside of RB1 range. He was a big time disappointment, and by definition, he fell off according to this. I am still personally in on Josh Jacobs because the market has only downgraded him 3 spots of redraft ADP. Given his new landing spot in Green Bay, it's a better offense, but just be aware that he did technically fall off last year, and it's possible that he doesn't really live up to where his ADP is, and his production is kind of just in line with his career averages. Maybe he finishes, RB 15 with 14 points per game this year. And that's probably not going to feel too good, knowing that you still, in a home league, might have to draft this guy in like the 3rd round. But again, on Underdog, it's a little bit more stomachable because he's like a 5th, 6th rounder. So 2022 production to 2023, a big time indicator potentially for these guys, especially Josh Jacobs. But as I kind of have made reference to this entire video, the unique thing about this year is that a lot of these guys are not expensive, especially in rooms that are sharper, especially in rooms like Underdog Fantasy. This could differ in home leagues, but you can get guys like Ezekiel Elliott who project kind of solid for a good offense with a lot of touches under his belt. Yes, but he also has the ability to carry a workload for a good team. He might be set for a big role this year, and he's RB 38 in ADP. A couple years ago, he probably would have been like RB 19 as like a 3rd round pick or a 4th round pick, but he is going off the board outside of the first 10 rounds in Underdog Fantasy drafts. James Conner, who was still good last year, yeah, he's over the age and touch apex, but he's being drafted RB 27. Round 6, round 7, round 8 comes along, and he's still on the board. Josh Jacobs and Joe Mixon, who I kind of just mentioned already, project the same as they've always had. Like, Josh Jacobs and Joe Mixon have always been the same guy. They've been back-end RB1 to mid-RB1 type of projections on good and bad years, but now you're getting them in round 5, round 6, instead of round 2 or round 3, like we had to take them a couple of years ago. Aaron Jones, who clearly fell off last year, would normally still be going in round 3, round 4, as I made reference to, but now he's going RB19, 81st overall in Underdog Fantasy. So again, league to league, this is going to differ, and I have redraft ADP from standard home leagues, Underdog ADP from, of course, Underdog Fantasy, and Dynasty ADP listed there. It's really all about the price point with these guys. So this is their current market values. If you can offload their age and touch risk that they have under their belt at a position where deteriorating play and injuries will become more common, I'm absolutely shopping these guys in Dynasty. I'm absolutely avoiding these guys when the price gets too high in redraft and best ball. But like I said, in best ball, in Underdog specifically, I am less concerned about these prices because it is totally baked in. Sharper redraft leagues will be the same way. In casual leagues, again, maybe Aaron Jones still goes round 3, round 4, round 5. But in sharper redraft leagues, they're going to let him fall just like he is in Underdog Fantasy into round 7, into round 8. And at that price point, I'm actually okay with selecting these guys. So there is still Dynasty leagues out there where people will pay a 1st round pick for Derrick Henry or Joe Mixon's production. So I don't want to exclude anybody who plays in a league like that. If that is the case, you should absolutely be selling these guys. But I don't play any leagues like that. Everybody that I play in Dynasty leagues with is smarter than that. They know not to give away a 1st rounder for Derrick Henry and Joe Mixon. In those league markets, it will absolutely be worth selling those players. But if not, you could probably swap them for younger running backs, or maybe you're taking a little bit less of a value. Maybe you sell Derrick Henry for an early 2nd round pick and Zach Charbonnet or something like you guys can see on the screen. Using our Dynasty trade calculator would be a huge way to figure out if the trades you're being offered for your Joe Mixon, for your David Montgomery, for your Alvin Kamara, whatever running back you're trying to sell, are good value. And you can get my opinion specifically on these trades by selecting me inside the trade calculator, and that is just one of the many features of our site, Flock Fantasy. So if you guys did enjoy this video, leave a like down below, subscribe to the channel if you're new. Again, this was more of a strategic video. There's not any specific buys, any specific sells, but it's just a matter of if you have these guys in Dynasty and you're not competing, you need to sell them. If you guys are drafting these guys in redraft leagues, you need to get them at a value. And as I mentioned, as I made reference to, using our Dynasty trade calculator for Dynasty purposes and trying to trade these guys away is going to be a huge advantage to you guys. And that is one of the many features available to Flock Fantasy subscribers. We have tons of content over on Flock Fantasy. The FSE wide receiver and running back prospect models are live on the site. I have a video breaking down how the 2025 running back class actually stacks up according to the model. That is a site exclusive vid. You will not see that on YouTube. And I'm also doing a mass overhaul of the Dynasty trade value chart so you know exactly how much Derrick Henry should be worth worth, how much you should be trying to get for him in a trade, so on and so forth. We also have our best ball rankings live if you want to take this advice right into underdog drafts. We also have our redraft guide, which will be coming out about 2 weeks from now when you guys are getting ready for your home league drafts. And if you can sign up today, go to the description box, hit flockfantasy.com/FSE. That link will bring you right to the page. Sign up for your 7-day free trial, get 30% off any of the packages, and annual Mother Flocker subscribers get a free Dynasty team review from yours truly or from Danny after sign up. So again, hope you enjoyed this video. Hope you got some value from it. This data will be posted to the site as well. But with that being said, peace out, and we'll talk to you soon.